Okay, so it is 9:30, so we'll get going. This is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 1 to 5 on today's agenda. For the items just mentioned, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the local planning appeal tribunal. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the local planning appeal tribunal if council does not adopt an amendment within 90 days of receipt of the application for zoning and 120 days for an official plan amendment. To submit written comments on these amendments prior to their consideration by City Council on May the 26th, please email or call the committee or council coordinator, who is the lovely Melody Duffany. And if anybody has any motions that we have not seen yet that you'll be bringing forward today, please do so as quickly as possible. As you know, it's always helpful if we can see these ourselves in advance, and certainly the any of the applicants, the delegations that may be joining us today as well. I'm going to do a quick quorum call just to get that out of the way. So, Councillor Brockington. Yes, I see you.
I'm here.
Councillor Cloutier.
He's here.
Yeah, I see you. Councillor Judas, I see you. I feel like romper room. Just occurred to me, you know, the looking glass. Councillor Hughley. I see you, Alan. Councillor Kitts is here. Councillor Leeper is here. Councillor Moffat.
Here.
Oh, thanks, Scott. Councillor Suds is here. Councillor Tierney is here. And Councillor Alshantiri is here. Thank you, everyone. We have a full house. So, any declarations of interest? I see none. Confirmation of minutes from the April 22nd meeting and the special joint meeting of the Planning Committee and Community and Protective Services Committee meeting, which was also on April 22nd. Anyone have any changes to make? No? So is the item carried? Both of
Carried.
Carried.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to go through the consent agenda and see what we can clear away. The first one we won't be clearing away because it's we have speakers speaking in opposition and support. And this is the zoning bylaw amendment for 5,000 Robert Grant Avenue, formerly 1,000 Robert Grant Avenue. So we're holding that item. Item number 2 is 6429 Renault Road. It's a zoning bylaw amendment. We do have a technical amendment that just came in this morning. It's very simply about the air conditioner. And Vice Chair Gower has a technical amendment for this.
Yep, I'll just wait for it to come up on screen.
We don't have anyone speaking in opposition to this. The applicant is here if necessary, so we'll see what that technical amendment is, and then I'll ask you all whether or not you need to hold this item. Go ahead, Vice Chair Gower.
Okay, I'll read it out now. Whereas the report recommends a zoning amendment to bylaw 2008-250 to permit low-rise back-to-back and stacked townhouses at 6429 Renault Road, and whereas the applicant has alerted staff to an omission in the details of recommended zoning document 2 in relation to the permitted location for air conditioners, therefore be it resolved that document 2, item 2B, be amended such that point 2 of the third bullet should now read, 2, air conditioner condenser may be located in a front yard or corner side yard when units are attached back to back, and be it further resolved that no further notice be provided pursuant to subsection 3417 of the Planning Act.
Thank you very much. So does anyone have any questions that on this item or on the technical amendment? No, I don't see any.
There's a couple hands up, Chair.
Okay, hang on a second. on Renault Road. We're asking questions, okay? Then we're holding the item. Thank you. Who did have their hands up? Councillor Meehan and,
I'm just putting my hand up, Jen, because I'd like to just have, say something about item number 6. So I just want to make sure that I'm just not missed on that. Thanks.
oh, okay, so not for that item. Not for item 2.
Julie Carrera
Okay.
had a hand up as well, Chair.
Oh, well, I'm gonna ask you, Julie. So, but I was asking the committee members, anybody on the committee or council have any questions on this, on the 6429 Renault Road, or on the technical amendment? Okay, so Julie, I'll be asking you, if we're prepared to carry this item, do you still need to speak?
Yes, unfortunately, something else has come up to do with the back-to-backs that are not addressed as a separate type in the bylaw, so.
Okay, so then I'm going to recommend that we do have a deferral of this item, because this is, I want to applaud staff who went to bat this morning and pulled together the air conditioning motion, because it was so simple. It was just like, you know, as you just saw, a couple of words. That's what we're going to do. And Vice Chair Gower, you'll move a deferral motion to the meeting of May the 27th. Okay?
Yes, so moved.
Okay. Everybody's that carried?
Carried.
Right.
Carried.
Thank you.
Thanks. So item number 3 is the zoning bylaw amendment for 177 to 179 Armstrong Street and 268 Carruthers Avenue. I don't have anyone speaking in opposition. Does anyone have any questions on this item?
Chair, may I just say thank you to residents and to staff for a productive consultation process on this one.
Thanks very much, Councillor Lieber. Mr. Holzman or Joey Theberge, do either of you need to speak if we're prepared to carry this item?
Councillor Chair, can you hear me? It's Bill Holzman.
Yes, I can, Bill.
Great. Well, I just want to take about 15 seconds to state that our firm has been working on this file since 2012 for 9 years, and we have come to a conclusion here with the good input and work by the ward councillor, the community association, and we're thrilled with the staff support, and we trust that the council will support this, planning committee and council as well. So we'll just wait if there's any questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Bill. So with no questions, is this item carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Good. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Everybody. Thank you, Bill.
You're most welcome.
The next item is the zoning bylaw amendment in Councillor Brockington's ward at 1707 Fisher Avenue. I have no one at all registered here, applicant-wise or...
Carrie, you do have the applicant Rod Price is here.
Oh, Rod is. Sorry, Rod. I missed you. Where are you?
Let me just make sure he's joined.
Okay,
Yes,
so
he's
let me
there.
ask everybody, does anyone have any questions on this? I'm thinking not. Oh, hi, Rod.
Good morning, Councillor, members of the committee. Yep, Rod Price
Hang
on
on,
behalf
don't
of
say
Water
anything yet.
Land Development.
Rod,
Oh.
hang on.
Okay.
Does anyone have any questions on this item? On Fisher Avenue? So Rod, if we're prepared to carry this, do you still need to speak?
Nope.
No?
Nope,
So is this item, thank you. So is this item carried?
Carried.
Carried. Thank you. Thanks, Rod. Okay, the zoning bylaw amendment for 1 Dunbar Court. This is in Councillor Eglai's ward, and I know, and he just wants to say a few words, but not yet, Keith. I just want to ask everybody, does anyone have any questions on this application from the PN Housing? No? And Jane, you're with us. Do you need to speak if we're prepared to carry this item? No, you don't. I can see you shaking your head. Okay, back to you, Councillor Eglai, and then we'll take a quick vote.
Thanks, Chair. Just very quickly, I just want a few quick words of thanks to planning staff, to Donna Gray's shop, to yourself, Chair, for being very supportive of this project, and a big thank you to Nepean Housing, because this is a really smart use of existing land. They're using land that they already own, that they previously developed They're developing it better. They create more units, nicer units, a community building. So I just wanted to not let that go unacknowledged and thank everybody involved and for bringing this project to Ward 9. And it's much needed, and it will be much appreciated, much used. So thank you, everybody involved.
Thanks very much, Councillor Aguilar. So on the Nepean housing application zoning bylaw amendment 1 Dunbar Court, is it carried? Carried.
Great.
Thanks, everyone. So item number 6, we do have, this is the one where, oh no, we have late breaking news on this one. At about 9:23, staff came forward with a well, an amendment that we needed for it. And I know that Pierre Dufresne is here, and I recognize Councillor Meehan that you want to speak to this one. So
Well, I'm curious about what this late breaking development.
your office, you were sent a copy, but perhaps you didn't see it because it is very, very recent.
No, I haven't.
Okay, but I did check to make sure. So you just, it's that soon that you just probably missed it, the solution in the 10 minutes. I hesitate to hold this because it could be quite a while before we get back to you. Do you all, can we present the motion here? And you see Pierre there. So in a nutshell, Ms. Snedden, why don't you just say what this is doing? Leanne?
Yes, Madam Chair, thanks very much. I'm just trying to find my screen. Just one sec here. So Madam Chair, members of the committee, what we're doing here is accelerating the payment for the applicants in this particular case. So the work has already been completed. And we have the money within the budget that finance has been able to confirm. So the applicant has asked if we would be willing to accelerate that payment. And so this is what this motion and this report is asking to do. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Am I the only one that's having a hard time hearing Ms. Snedden?
Seems fine, Chair.
I heard her.
I heard her fine.
Oh, yeah, okay. Our Haven again. Okay, Leanne. So it's paying them back now as opposed to, because we have the money for it. So that's what the change is.
That is correct.
Yeah. Is that okay, Councillor Meehan?
Well, can somebody explain to me what's happening? Sorry, I just
Okay,
don't have.
so this is what we're going to do. I'm going to hold the item. If somebody could speak to Councillor Meehan off, maybe obviously off of the Hollywood squares here.
Yeah, but I need to, because I don't have anything in front of me that indicates anything happening overnight or this morning. So we're paying the Leitrim Landowners Group back money that because we have money to pay them back for the front loading of that intersection design change. Is that it?
They've already done the work.
They've already done the work, so we're paying them back. So that is a good thing. Okay, I'm happy. I'm happy to that. So that's the entire gist of this whole. Okay.
Yes, this is a front-ending agreement that is to pay the applicants back for the road works, the widening and the intersection. And so they've designed that intersection. So this is to reimburse.
And Leanne.
Okay, Councillor Meehan,
yeah.
I'm going to move on, and we're going to hold that item. And if you can speak to Ms. Snedden or whomever she designates.
It's okay. I'll talk to Pierre. Thank you very much. Okay.
Okay. All right, moving, but the next one is reimbursement of the intersection of Bank Street and Blay Road, McKenna Road, and Mr. Dufresne is here for that one as well. This is also in your ward, Councillor Meehan, and also in Councillor DeRuse's ward. So do you have any issue with this one, Councillor Meehan? Number 7, no? Okay. And I don't think anyone else has any questions on it. No, so Mr. Dufresne, Pierre, if we're prepared to carry this item, do you still need to speak to it? Okay, so on the reimbursement of the intersection at Bank Street and Blay Road, McCann Road, is that carried?
Carried.
Okay, number 8 is the heritage permits issued through Delegated Authority 2020. Is that no questions?
Received.
Received?
Received.
Thank you. The next item is being held. It has site plan control standard for Range Road, and this is in Councillor Fleury's ward, and we have speakers for and against, so we'll hang on to that one. And then we have 2 IPDs, one on Cash and Little Parkland, and one which is an update on the residential mural 1-year pilot program. Does anyone need to lift this? Okay, I'm going to allow Councillor Leeper just to say a few words on the residential mural 1-year pilot program for the record.
Just to thank staff for the work that they've done on that. Obviously, everyone on City Council wants to see murals more enabled. There is some work to still be done, and you heard the mayor chat about it at the one of our recent meetings on commercial murals in commercial zones. And I know that staff will begin to work on that as soon as they have the capacity to. So it might be a while, but that's definitely the direction in which we're heading.
Good. Thanks very much for that. Okay, everyone, we'll go back to the beginning. And the first item is the zoning bylaw amendment for 5,000 Robert Grant Avenue, formerly 1,000 Robert Grant Avenue. And Vice Chair Gower has a motion he'd like to introduce before we go to the delegates. Vice Chair Gower?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this is a motion to amend the holding condition, and the report as it's written, well, I'll read out the whereas and the therefore be it resolved. So whereas Robert Grant Avenue is planned as the major north-south transportation corridor for Stittsville from Fernbank Road to Palladium Drive, providing the necessary transportation needs for Fernbank residents, including space for vehicles, transit, cyclists, and pedestrians. And whereas Robert Grant Avenue is currently only built from Fernbank Road to Abbott Street, and whereas Robert Grant Avenue is scheduled to be constructed with 2 lanes in phases, and the final section includes Maple Grove Road to Hazeldean Road within the affordable network. And whereas a future bus rapid transit station is planned adjacent to the 5,000 Robert Grant Avenue site, but is not scheduled to be built until after 2031. Therefore, be it resolved that the holding provision recommended by staff in document 2, details of recommended zoning, 3D3A, be revised to the following. The holding symbol may only be removed at such time as the segment of Robert Grant Avenue between Abbott Street and Maple Grove Road has been constructed and open to vehicular traffic. And be it further resolved that no further notice be provided pursuant to subsection 3417 of the Planning Act. I will explain what this means later on in my wrap-up, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Vice Chair Gower. So we'll go to the delegates, and I want to thank everyone who submitted their comments. We received a lot of correspondence from you, so thank you very much. The first one up is Neil McClellan. Neil, are you here?
No, Chair, he's having difficulties. He will join us, but if you can skip ahead to the next.
Sure. I'll go to Jennifer Kong and Andrew Bonner. And I see you there. Welcome.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for having us.
Everyone, can I just before you start, I just will tell everyone today that we'll be speaking that the rule is 5 minutes that the delegates get and the applicants for that matter. Go ahead, Andrew. Sorry to disturb you.
Thank you. Well, we're here today to speak as residents in the Blackstone development, of which this proposed development will impact. And while we oppose the entire development, just due to it being incongruent with our neighborhood and what the residents need of the neighborhood, we're here really to speak about the traffic impact that this development will have. as well as the safety of families living around Blackstone Park. So we've already seen, as residents of Tapadera Avenue, we've seen firsthand the impact that the low-rise rental apartments that have been built along Livery Street have had on traffic within the neighborhood. Because there's no through road from from Livery to Robert Grant, traffic was funneled through Tapadero, through Bobolink, and through Westphalian to Terry Fox. So this proposed development will add another 700 cars down our streets. There's 700 parking spots, which I think is just a little bit, it's a little high considering that we're going to be it's going to be built next to a transit corridor, proposed transit corridor. And we've already seen that approximately, there's been about 1,000 vehicle trips added just due to the 200 extra residents down Livery Street. This will add about 2,000 to 3,000 more vehicle trips down our street. And my wife and I have seen many times very close calls with children at Blackstone Park. People driving down Tapadero do not respect the speed limits whatsoever. They don't respect the stop signs. They don't respect anything unfortunately, around the park. And adding an additional 2,000 to 3,000 car trips down Tapadero every single day seems incongruent with the safety of the neighborhood. And furthermore, we don't understand why this needs to be 18 stories tall. We also own a condo and a residential building downtown that isn't that high. So it seems quite inconsistent that we would build something this tall in an area that is just not designed for it. And we still have developable land within the Greenbelt to build these apartments. So I think overall, we do oppose this, and we'd like it noted that we don't think this is going to be safe if there is a garage access through Livery, where residents of these proposed buildings will be able to access residential streets. We think that it should be limited to access just to Robert Grant Avenue. Do you have anything else? Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Vice Chair Gower has a question for you. Glenn?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jennifer and Andrew, for presenting today. I wanted to ask you, how long did you say you lived in the neighborhood for?
5 years.
5 years. And were you first-time homeowners?
Yes.
You bought from the builder? Were you aware that the site that this is on, were you given any indication about the zoning that existed, the 9-story zoning that already existed on the site when you purchased, or?
No.
Okay. Because that is a problem, because this is some feedback we've heard from a lot of people, that people buying homes were told that this whole area along Robert Grant would be actually, low-rise commercial. So I can understand a lot of surprise from the community that the land is actually zoned for taller buildings. I just wanted to mention, I'm going to ask the applicant, we have Miguel Tremblay from FOTEN, later on in this meeting to address some of those traffic impacts, because it is a concern about how do we make sure as many of the vehicles as possible are being sent towards the Robert Grant side of the property as opposed to the Livery side. That's something that we are going to address through the site plan process, but I will ask later on that Mr. Tremblay speak a little bit to how that's going to be accomplished, because I agree, we want to see people using the arterial road coming in and out of this project as much as possible, and then they'd go down Robert Grant or they'd take Abbott Street, because it really doesn't make sense for vehicles to go twisting and turning through Livery and Tapadero and so on. So we will chat about that later on with Mr. Tremblay. But thank you for your presentation today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see anyone else with questions. Thank you for joining us today. I have just our committee coordinator, Ms. Stephanie, says that Mr. McClellan can't seem to rejoin the webinar.
We just got him, Chair. He
Oh,
did.
you got him?
Yeah.
Boy, this is a meeting of surprises. We just keep trying. So, Neil, are you there? Where are you?
I am.
There you are.
Can you hear me on my speaker?
Yes, we can. Welcome.
Thank you ever so much.
Go ahead, sir. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to address this committee. I know I only have 5 minutes to speak, so I chose to submit my opinions along with supporting references as to why this project should not be approved in its current form to the committee last Monday. I will ask 2 additional questions shortly and hope that the committee can address them when I finish speaking. For those of you watching on YouTube, I contend that 5000 Robert Grant does not meet any of the 3 criteria required to amend the current bylaw. There isn't an abutting major urban facility, nor a main street abutting another main street on a transit priority corridor. And it's unknown if a rapid transit station would be located within 400 meters of 5000 Robert Grant, because the exact location of the station is unknown. Using an estimated location on Google Maps, I question that the station, in fact, is within that 400-meter parameter. More importantly, I couldn't find any documentation to substantiate that the city is actually planning a transit station. I could not find any site plans, designs, engineering reports, reserve funds, budgets, advertisements, or mappings. Mr. Gower, however, was kind enough to send me a map Monday night. But to think that Lapine could have their application approved based on a conceptual map alone is not very comforting, particularly in light of how much public opposition there is to the project, as indicated by the petitions that were submitted to the city. In my submitted notes, I asked what mechanisms would be put in place to ensure that Lapine or a new owner would not build Building C before the Robert Grant extension was completed. Mr. Gower assured me that this would be written into the new bylaw. But that's not terribly reassuring, since we're now all experiencing the fact that a bylaw can be amended at any time. It's now come to my attention that under the official plan, section 4.11, that wind and shadow patterns need to be evaluated. Wind and shadows were referenced not once, not twice, but 5 times in this section. Do the councilors know if the wind and shadow analyses have been completed? My last concern is regarding the construction of a massive building within 50 meters of a 500,000 volt transmission line. 2 years ago, Hydro One cleared all the natural brush under their low voltage lines in Canada near Stonehaven. The primary reason for doing this was to reduce the possibility of arcing between the transmission lines and the brush. Do the councilors know if arcing can occur between a 500,000 volt transmission line and a building made with steel structurals, steel cladding, and fully loaded with electrical wiring, TVs, and appliances? I think it's worth asking the councilors how they think people 20 years from now will feel about the decision to allow the construction of a 200-foot tall tower in this location. Will they think it was a brilliant decision? Or will the comments be somewhat less generous, especially in light of employers continuing to encourage employees to work from home, resulting in less demand to rent or own office space in the city core? How businesses functioned prior to 2020 will in all likelihood bear no resemblance to how businesses will operate in 2040 and beyond.
1 minute.
I'm sure council will consider this in their daily decision making, and will do so again before deciding on the Robert Grant application. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, and thanks for trying so hard to join us today. The questions you've raised, we'll answer those. The way that this works is we have the delegates speaking first, and then after that happens, any members of council, including committee members, but all members of council, can ask questions of staff. And so I'm sure you're going to try to stay on the line, and hopefully your questions will get answered. And we have, you're welcome. And Vice Chair Gower has a question for you right now, though. Vice Chair Gower?
Sure.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Neil, for your delegation today. And I also appreciate the opportunity that we had last week to speak on the phone about some of the issues you've raised. And thanks as well for the detailed comments you sent to committee. What I wanted to ask you is if you could describe to committee a little bit about what Robert Grant Avenue looks like now and why it is such a transportation issue for people in your community.
Well, as I understand it, the primary entrance and exit would be onto Robert Grant. And Robert Grant in this part, well, I guess the whole part of Robert Grant so far is one lane in each direction. So anyone exiting 5000 Robert Grant onto Robert Grant will have to make a right-hand turn, go northbound, regardless if the person wants to continue north to Hazeldean or go down to Fernbank. And conversely, if somebody wants to come back to their residence on 5000 Robert Grant, they will have to, if they're north, they'll have to come down to Bobolink and use the roundabout there. Every car entering or exiting Robert Grant is going to cross over the bicycle path and the sidewalk. And I think that's going to be a conflict for pedestrians and for bicyclists.
Okay, thank you, Neil.
There's
And
no
it's-
merge lane onto Robert Grant, and there's no exit lane to be able to, for people to pull off to the right-hand side before entering into 5000 Robert Grant. Because every other Lapine facility that I've seen are on major roads. And when I say major, by the city's description of a main street, it says there are 4 lanes, 2 lanes in each direction. We don't have that on Robert Grant.
And I know you-
I believe each of the other facilities that I've seen also have traffic lights at those locations. You don't have that on Robert Grant.
And I know you have been out at a few of the other Lapine sites in Ottawa to just have a look at the environment and the conditions there, which is helpful.
I went to every one that I could just to make sure that I understood what would probably be replicated in Stittsville.
Okay,
And,
thank you, Neil.
And I'll make just one other comment is I think somebody missed urban geography 101 classes because there's no comparison to Robert Grant to any of the other facilities. And don't get me wrong, I think Lapine makes a beautiful building and beautiful facilities. This facility would probably suit Palladium far more than the proposed location on Robert Grant. Just a comment. I know it's not going to happen. Just a comment.
Okay, well, I see another colleague has a question, and thank you, Neil. You've raised some good points, and when we do get to questions for staff, I'm sure myself and some of my colleagues will raise some of these points. So thank you, Neil.
Thank you.
Councillor Moffat?
Yes. I thought I was
Sorry.
reading your lips and it looked like you were saying Councillor Moffat. So I don't have a question, but just I don't think there's anyone here from Hydro Ottawa today to speak to the comment you made about arcing. I can tell you there is information on Hydro Ottawa's website that speaks to overhead clearance. It does touch on arcing. It does touch on safe distance from power lines, including buildings. These buildings are quite well set back from the power lines when you go look at the information on Hydro Ottawa's, but just a quick Google search of Hydro Ottawa overhead clearance, and you'll find some answers to those questions you had about arcing.
I understand that, and I've done that research. Not sure who I'm speaking to.
That's Councillor Moffat.
Thank you, Councillor Moffat. It says, it's beyond my meager intelligence how you could put 30,000 tons of structural steel within 500,000 or within 50 meters of a 500,000 volt transmission line. But as I said, it's not my expertise. It just doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. Personal opinion.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, on the website, what you'll notice is that minimum safe distance from power lines, 250,000 volts or higher, is 6 meters. And you're talking about 50 meters.
Sir, would you live in a building within 6 meters of 500,000 volts?
Many people in this city do, and yes, I would, because it's safe. Thank you.
Great. Hope you
Thank
have
you.
the opportunity to live next to it, sir.
Thank you, Mr. McClellan. Thanks very much for coming out today. Our next speaker is Tanya Hine. Tanya is the president of the Stittsville Village Association. Tanya, are you with us?
Good morning.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you, Chair. The SBA has a number of concerns with the arguments that were put forward in the staff report and the zoning bylaw amendments that were requested by the developer. Like others have said, this particular application has generated more comments from residents to our organization than anything else I can remember in at least the last decade or so. And for good reason, I think. Stittsville residents have long balanced our history as a village with one of the most intense growth rates in the city. I'm sure you've seen that in Barhaven as well. While residents in the adjacent neighborhoods have been the most vocal in their concerns, I don't really think that this is a NIMBY situation like I've heard in the media. Almost every person that I've spoken to has voiced support for reasonable growth, including mid-rise buildings, almost unanimously, though they're really opposed to what we consider precocious growth in an area that's not really ready to support it yet. What I heard over and over from people is too much height and too much density. The existing zoning allows for up to 9 stories, which is already a tremendous leap over anything else in Stittsville. No other structure is even close to that. Having 9-story buildings would make a significant and permanent change to the character of the community and would allow for a lot more accommodation diversity. We certainly need more rentals in Stittsville, but we don't just need 1 and 2 bedroom luxury units. We are sorely lacking in affordable housing, including rental units that would accommodate larger families, not maybe just professionals or smaller units. I saw the words sensitive and compatible when they were talking about setbacks and how the buildings transition to the existing neighborhoods. But as proposed, the development is not sensitive, it's not compatible with the neighboring communities, and it's going to change the landscape of Stittsville in a drastic way. Everybody understands that compatible doesn't mean the same, but the people who actually live in the area know that Livery, for example, is already a crowded residential street. They know that a parking garage access to hundreds of homes really isn't going to help. They know that setbacks are not going to disguise a building that's 4.5 times taller than anything else in the community. They know that Robert Grant isn't yet functioning as the arterial main street that it's meant to be. And they certainly realize that rapid transit, the rapid transit that this whole application is based on, is still more of a distant dream than an actual plan. If the zoning is approved, it's going to set a precedent that I'm sure we're going to see repeated as the next blocks within that 400-meter radius are developed. And that would just compound the problem that we see. At the SVA, we prefer a more moderate approach to intensification that comes only when the appropriate infrastructure is in place. So that means a more incremental growth pattern and not a disproportional 18-story benchmark influencing other premature development long before the infrastructure is in place. We really feel that a developer with Lapine's experience has the talent and the resources to create a really vibrant set of buildings that can also respect the existing zoning and the surrounding neighborhoods in a better way. Now, it looks like the revision that Councillor Gower mentioned might address this, but putting a hold on the tower until Robert Grant is extended only to Hazeldean might delay some of the problems headed toward the neighborhood, but it's not going to solve the issue, and it's not going to get anyone to abandon their cars in favor of taking a bus. Rapid transit is more than a decade away, as likely as a proper connection from Robert Grant to the Queensway. Until those things happen, the impact of Stittsville's infrastructure deficits are going to continue to be amplified. Finally, I'd like to address the issue of the community amenity that's being proposed to support the rezoning application. A pathway and a small piece of sidewalk, as far as I can tell. It's really underwhelming. I'd really like to see the developer offer an amenity that's more in keeping with the scope of the variance that's being requested, not just putting up a little bit of space that would have been used as a pedestrian cut through anyway. So those are my points in a nutshell. I'd like to thank you for letting me share some of the concerns that we received at the SBA.
Thank you very much, Tanya. I appreciate that. Vice Chair Gower has a question for you.
Yes.
Thank you, Tanya. Thanks for the presentation today. I wanted to ask if you could give a better picture to the committee about the current transportation network overall in Stittsville. I think you have a very good global view of what commuting, day-to-day errands, what that looks like without having Robert Grant Avenue fully built for people who live here.
You know, I personally haven't had to make the commute on a regular basis, but I do hear the complaints. It's incomplete all across Stittsville. You know, there's a lot of misconnections. Robert Grant has been touted as one of the, you know, the major spine routes that we need to have in place. And I think as we have literally thousands of building permits in the Fernbank area, that problem is going to be compounded more and more. So we really need to have those connections actually connected to the Queensway to have better mobility for people that are working downtown. You know, I'm sure COVID right now is having a temporary impact on how many people are commuting, how many people are taking the bus. But, you know, there should be light at the end of that tunnel, and eventually more people are going to be moving from Stittsville all the way downtown and back on a daily basis again. If you've been on Carp Road during rush hour, it's a mess. Any way to get to the Queensway or any way to try and get from Stittsville to work downtown is just a disaster most mornings.
Okay, thank you, Tanya.
Thank you. Councillor Leeper has a question for you.
I do, and Tanya, I'm struggling with this one. The intensification that we need to see in the city is going to have to be distributed throughout the city. That's something that Kitchissippi residents are very keen to see. But it's also critical as we move with intensification further out into the suburban areas that we still support 15-minute community type of development. Can you just, I've been looking at the map throughout this morning at length. Where is the grocery store? Where is the gym? Where is the library? How are people going to, you know, not just commute? And I get the challenges associated with commuting here. I get the challenges with the transit that really doesn't exist in any meaningful way at this point. But how are people also going to go about their day-to-day existence beyond the commute?
Well, just looking at the clubhouse, for example, that's being proposed, it's a one-story structure with a swimming pool and some meeting rooms. I think those meeting rooms could be moved into one of the bigger buildings. There's an excellent community pool minutes away at the Cardall Rec Center that people could use.
Okay.
This area is sort of on the ridge between Canada and Stittsville. So there's library options if you go to Stittsville, Maine, or you can go into Glencairn for library.
Can
there
you
are
walk
grocery
to
stores in the area.
Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt, but can you walk to any of these facilities? It sounds like the gym is close, an easy walk by.
You could walk. You know, there's trail access to the gym, so that would be easy. Would I want to walk necessarily with my 4 children of, you know, various ages to some of the facilities and, you know, get our week's groceries? No.
Yeah. Where is the nearest grocery store to this facility or to this proposal?
It would probably be the Canada Sobeys.
Okay.
Or Walmart as well, depending on where people like to shop.
Yeah, I'm struggling with a development of this intensity in this location where it's not on a main street. It's not nestled amid commercial amenities. We're absorbing a lot of really tall buildings in Kitchissippi Ward, Westboro, Hintonburg that are, you know, a hop, skip, and a jump away from grocery stores. It's an easy walk.
Yes.
And so you don't have to drive around the community to get to the library, to the gym, to the grocery store, the coffee shop, etc. I'm struggling with this one. All right. Thank you, Tanya. I appreciate it.
I agree with the points you made.
Thank you, Tanya, for coming out. Okay.
Thank you, Tam.
Next speaker we have is Miguel Tremblay with Photon on behalf of and Pascal Lapine from Group Lapine. Miguel?
Yes, good morning. You can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I have a brief presentation. Melody will work the controls for me. And if it's okay, I may steal a little bit of Pascal's time, but our intent is still to come under the 10 minutes. As always, my intent is never to revisit all of the analysis and the policy overview of the staff report, but I will, if you can go to the next slide, please. I will flush out some of those policies, especially in light of some of the comments made by the delegations related to the role of Robert Grant and some other policy considerations. As always, my intent is always to tip my hand a little bit to the committee and leave you with a couple of thoughts early. And the 2 points that I want to make, and I would appreciate the committee were to retain, is number one, this is truly not a density discussion. The densities proposed on the site are actually about 10% lower than the densities anticipated by the Ottawa official plan, the Fernbank CDP, and the existing zoning. And I really want you to retain that. This is my second point, an exercise in not density allocation, but density redistribution. I'm having some problems. Okay, density redistribution in that, and I've always taken this position that building to the existing zoning is not necessarily the best urban design response. Everything that Lepin did here was to integrate the project better. Yes, it is taller, but that height, which is afforded to Lepin in those policy documents and allows the city to consider greater height, has been to affect a better building form transition to Livery and the community to the east, and also recognizing that a transition will be necessary to the eventual residential community on the west side of Robert Grant. Next slide, if you don't mind. Actually, 2 slides. We'll skip this one just for this is Livery. And I'm going to try to touch on some of Councillor Leaper's questions as well. Actually, I should have done it on the previous slide, but the lands are designated arterial Main Street. The arterial Main Street permits buildings up to 9 stories. It also provides us with an evaluative criteria to assess if greater building height can be accommodated. In this case here, Lepin chose to redistribute that height into something different in order to respond well to the context and an effort to transition. You'll recognize that Robert Grant is a 44-meter wide arterial roadway. It is a transit priority corridor, but most importantly, next slide, please. These lands are immediately south of a proposed transit station and a park and ride facility that is proposed to be located within the hydro corridor. Just quickly on that matter, we are doing other applications, including an application on Tarrant Road, where we will be putting parking within a hydro corridor. It is very reasonable, and there's a very defined hydro process as to how to do that. To Councillor Leaper's questions earlier, and some of the delegations, yes, the area within 400 meters of this transit station will transform over time. Councillor Leaper, you should be aware that the properties immediately to the south of the Lepin property, if you remember the air photo that I showed, is anticipated to be the village green within the Fernbank CDP area. And actually some of the design considerations that Lepin did was to open up potential synergies with that property, which will kind of fulfill that function. It does have a mixed use function in the CDP document. It is intended to be something bigger and better, but other lands within proximity, with the exception of the high school, will over time be characterized by high-rise buildings. Next slide, please. Actually, 2 slides. This is in your staff report. It's the zoning. So to be abundantly clear, this is what is permitted today under the current zoning. It has about 550 to 560 units in 30-meter high, 9-story mid-rise buildings. It provides little to no transition to Livery. It provides less functional open space, as you'll see in comparison to the new proposal. and it doesn't afford for sunlight and all those other things, including the synergy to the property to the south that you can see, Councillor Leeper, abutting building B, the undeveloped lands. Next slide, please. This is the proposal. Building C is the 18-story building. The density has been pushed to that building because it's in closest proximity to the transit station. It frames Robert Grant. The pathway to the north is the community amenity. It's formalizing through the Lepin lands, an important pedestrian connection from Livery and the balance of that community to provide access to transit. Building A, previously a 9-story building, is now a 4, stepping to a 5, stepping to a 6-story building with very articulated setbacks in order to affect that transition to low-rise dwellings on Livery. It's removing that massing and redistributing it truly to building C. Building B, with its short edge to Robert Grant, is still a 9-story building as permitted under the zoning. In terms of the open space now, we have about 58% open space onto this property. It allowed Lepin to add an amenity building to meet some of the needs of the residents. You'll be aware, I think, from other projects that Lepin is very much focused on seniors apartments. And it opens up a good portion of the site now to the property to the south, which is the Village Green. Next slide, please. This is the transition, which is noticeably different. Yes, there's an 18-story building on the site now as opposed to 9-story buildings, but all of these efforts have been to transition properly to Livery beyond what the zoning would obligate Lepin to do. It's intended to transition the height to the transit station, recognizing that there will be a park and ride facility. All of these lands are captured within that 400 meters. To one of the delegation's points, the frontage or the depth of this property is about 125 meters. So regardless of the location of that station, it will be well within that 400 meters. But for a density that is slightly less than what was originally anticipated in the existing zoning, Lepin is proposing 504 units, slightly less, 10% less than what is permitted in the zoning. Previous applications did not fully meet the parking requirements. There was a considerable amount of community discomfort related to that. So now the proposal, despite the fact that it's in proximity to transit, will meet the bylaw in an effort to unburden abutting streets from potential off-street parking. The density, and I know it's been brought up by delegations and some of the councillors, but the city, in this case now, there is no FSI on the property. The city is proposing an FSI of 3.5 to restrict the density to exactly what was permitted in the zoning. So this is truly an exercise, next slide please, in density redistribution to be mindful of abutting context. And I said this before, building to the existing zoning is not always the best urban design approach. This is sculpting that massing to make it more palatable. Yes, it's taller, but there are policies and criterias in the official plan that direct the city to consider taller buildings when you can do it better. That's the intent of those policies. So I'll leave it to that slide, I think. But it just, and you know, I've spent a lot of time on transition to Livery, but we were also very mindful of transition to that community to the west on the other side of Robert Grant. But recall that, and again, in massaging these forms, Robert Grant is a 44.5 meter wide arterial roadway, which will provide sufficient separation to that future community. The 18-story building now has a 4-story podium with a recessed tower to contribute to that transition, with a 7.5 front yard setback, 7.5 meter front yard setback, all in efforts to sculpt the massing to make it more positive transition to the abutting community. So in terms of traffic, the councillor in particular has spearheaded a restriction on the construction timing of the 18-story building to tie it to the construction of Robert Grant all the way to Maple Grove. To be clear, the traffic study fully supports all of the densities proposed without that condition. This is something that the councillor articulated, given community discomfort. LePin has agreed to that condition, but truly the network is available to support the density. Primary access will be.
Miguel,
Am I done?
you've used up all of the 10 minutes now, so there's no time left for Pascal, but we do have people asking questions. So, you know, perhaps you'll have the opportunity to finish whatever it was you were just going to say. Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Suds has questions. Councillor Suds.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I'll ask it now. I might ask again later of staff, but so I'm very familiar with Lapine and have some beautiful Lapine buildings here in my ward as well. Looks quite similar, I think, to what's trying to be achieved in this development. My question is, I'm not seeing any ground floor commercial. And, you know, when I look at what's happening here in my ward in similar circumstances, when I think about what we're trying to achieve with the 15-minute neighborhoods, that's a bit concerning to me that there is that amenity space that will be for those residents. But as this moves forward, are there any plans for ground floor commercial? And if not, why?
I can answer this. So service-oriented retail is something that we have in mind, but this is something that we're going to take into consideration more at the site plan level. I do want to add also that the block located south of the Village Green is owned by Choice REIT.
Just to add thank you, Pascal. The zoning doesn't preclude at grade commercial, and it permits it. The arterial Main Street zoning, we're not affecting it through the zoning. It's already permitted for at grade. And for instance, the Lapin project in your ward has a Morning Owl coffee shop and other amenities. Thank you.
Yeah. So again, as you know, thinking about this as you do move forward to site plan, you know, I think those amenities and that ground floor commercial or services is really important to kind of the fabric and the culture of this neighborhood as it grows. So it's certainly something that I'll be watching for, and I think should be a consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Leeper.
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Suds hit the nail on the head. It's an AM zoning, which obviously does allow for entirely residential developments, but I think it is counter to the spirit of what the AM zoning is attempting to do. And as we try to make livable density in our suburbs, it's critical that we have those amenities. Choice may own the property to the south, but that's not a guarantee that anything is going to be built by Choice, that the land will stay in their ownership. And as we move forward, we need to have that commercial arterial Main Street development. And I just don't see it here, which is a continued struggle on my part to try to bring myself to support this one.
Well,
I just want to add that when it comes to service-oriented retail for densities like this, it would be good for the city to take into consideration a reduction of the parking ratio, just because this isn't a strip mall, it's not a Walmart, it's not a grocery store. This would very much be for the neighborhood, for our residents.
Point well taken. Thank you.
Thank you. So before I go to Councillor Gower for questions, does anyone else on the committee or council have any questions? No? Councillor Gower?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Suds and Councillor Leeper for both raising the question about retail amenities. It's something that I've had a number of discussions with the Lepine group about. I do think when this whole neighborhood was master designed back in 2009, it was a miss that there wasn't specific local retail zoned, not mixed use, but actual local commercial zoning added here. So I'll add to my colleagues in encouraging Lepine once again to see if they can find a way to include a coffee shop, a hair salon, a yoga studio, that kind of space for the community. I wanted to ask Miguel, the first delegation we had mentioned 2,000 to 3,000 vehicle trips and concern about vehicles using Livery Street rather than Robert Grant as the primary entrance. Can you explain what the plan is from a planning perspective? What mitigation might there be to keep as much traffic as possible using Robert Grant as opposed to Livery?
Sure, and I think Pascal can speak to this as well, but recognizing that the property has 125 meters of frontage onto Robert Grant, the primary access will be on Robert Grant. There is a secondary access for fire blockages in the event that the main access is compromised for whatever reason. People need to be able to get in and out, but the intent is that access to Livery, which is set back, about 35 to 40 meters from the road, so it certainly won't be intrusive visually to Livery, but it's intended internally to be designed as a secondary access. Some of the previous delegations noted some of the challenges to moving around on Robert Grant, but it's quite the opposite. There are two roundabouts, both north and south of the proposed access for the Lepine Group property. So that's the beauty of roundabouts, is it allows you to maneuver without waiting for lights. So movements will be unencumbered in and out. If movements are intended to go eastbound, they would simply leave on Robert Grant, go north, and then use the roundabout and go on Abbott eastbound. So there would be very little incentive to use the Livery access to make their way through that community to work their way to Terry Fox, when Abbott would provide arterial road access to that.
And I just want to add that the underground parking is going to be designed in a way that it's going to be more convenient for our residents to be using the Robert Grant entrance. And the Livery entrance is going to be more of an inconvenience, but it's just that we need to have, for that type of density, we need to have a secondary parking entrance, just in case there's a door that fails or something like that.
And if I hope this is a fair question to either Pascal or Miguel, it would be ideal to have land further south of here developed as commercial rather than 100% residential. We are certainly seeing in Stittsville, and I'm sure it's true in other wards as well, there seems to be a lot of applications in mixed use areas for residential and very little that's coming in for commercial. Can you just talk about some of the trends or some of the factors that are behind it? Why is it so hard to get a local grocery store or a local coffee shop built in a mixed use zone like this? Why aren't we seeing more applications?
So I think a lot of it has to do, right now, COVID is a bit of an exception just to the current, how the market is taking it on with the retail and the office. But I think for us, really what's going to help us with the putting in that retail, putting in those coffee shops, those hairdressers, those dry cleaners, is going to be that taking into account that parking ratio. We're fully supportive of including retail into our buildings, but the challenge that we're having is to do with the parking ratios, but that's something that we're really open to including into our projects.
Maybe an additional comment, because we do a lot of work for Sobeys and Metro and Choice, and really, I mean, it's not that complicated of a business model in that they're looking for density and rooftops. So typically grocery stores don't go into communities that are under development, but rather are developed because they want the density there when they open up, not they're not interested in having density accrue around them. So we have sites, in Greeley and other locations for some of these retailers that are waiting for the densities to accrue. Projects like this facilitate that. They ultimately provide density that supports those uses.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to point out too that, 1.5 kilometers away, which is on the verge of a 15-minute walk, a little bit more, is the strip along Hazeldean Road. And it's not much today, but the way the zoning is there and future development is likely going to be very intense with retail and doctor's offices and other uses. And I'll speak a little bit later about the importance of Robert Grant Avenue, but it will be bike paths, walking paths, sidewalks, and so on. So as it grows, I hope that we're going to see more variety in what's here. It won't be just homes. We'll have a lot more variety into what's within a reasonable walking distance for residents. But
Great.
thank you, Pascal and Miguel.
Sorry, I just want to add something.
Yeah.
When I'm talking about the parking ratio, I'm not talking about the residential component. I'm talking about strictly the commercial component for that commercial portion. And also, commercial tends to come after the density, after the residential portion. So as this area really builds up, the commercial aspect and like the retail and the offices are going to follow after that. That's kind of the trend of the market and how development usually goes.
So I think, are you finished, Vice Chair Gower?
Yes.
So, it's interesting to have this conversation because 15-minute neighborhoods is something that's playing a big role in the official plan. And as you know, we'll see an updated draft sometime going into the summer, and then we'll be having before our joint committees. But I think that what's important, I'm going to ask Mr. Tremblay, Miguel, the zoning will stay available for commercial purpose when that time comes, or it might be at the beginning, or it might be during the time. But if you were to have residential or use it for residential, does not mean that it can't be converted. When demand shows itself at a later date, correct? Because of the zoning that's before us.
Yeah, the zoning, and it's not drawn to your attention because we're not amending any portion of the zoning to remove the commercial. It's always there. But we're working on other buildings that the ground floor can easily be converted. The one on Tarrant Road could be either and residential or commercial uses. And it's going to be a function of market at the time of site plan. And there's nothing that would preclude Lepin from doing commercial if it met the needs of their residents or the broader community.
Yeah, and I would just, if anybody knows the Colonnade Road area at all, back when that was in my ward, so in 2005 or so, when Ashcroft put their application in for the Ravine, I think is the retirement home and a whole series of places there. But on Colonnade itself, at the time, we made a firm decision to force commercial on the bottom. I haven't been by there for probably, with COVID, I haven't been by there probably for about 7 months, that piece. But in that entire time, other than having one laundromat there, I think it was, there has never been anything in that space. That's a long time for it to be empty. However, in one of the mayor's favorite sites is in it's a Campanelli in Barrhaven in Longfields, right by Longfield Station. And wow, it's just like what you want for that type of commercial, a small flower shop by an independent owner, a nice little Carmelitos Cafe that's just open and that sort of thing. And it's strictly because you've got the schools in place, you've got the density in place, you have a transit station, the Longfield Station, as I said, it's very walkable. You've got a 32-acre park there. I mean, it's just that it was okay to be ready from the start, even though the start of Longfields was 1990, but that infill that was massive, as some of you will recall, in the last 10 years or so. So that's interesting. So now Thanks to the Mr. Tremblay, Ms. Lepine. And now we're going to go to questions of staff. Who has questions of staff? Councillor Tierney.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. So question to staff, there was a delegation that was referring to Robert Grant Avenue, concerns that almost that it's not an arterial. Can you speak to what the designation of the street is and where we can see, where are there possible modifications in the future? Or how is this going to look as time goes on?
I'll take that, Madam Chair. The Robert Grant is designated as an arterial road in the Transportation Master Plan. At the moment, this segment of Robert Grant between Fernbank and Abbott Street it's in an interim configuration. Right now, it has a sidewalk and a MUP on each side of the road, and it's got 2 lanes of traffic. In the longer term, it will be widened, and there will also be a bus route running down the center boulevard of the street. So it will be 4 lanes of traffic and 2 lanes of bus traffic down the middle. So it's already designated as an arterial road. And as I mentioned, it's built up to Abbott Street. The segment between Abbott up to Hazeldean, which is the next segment as you head north, that one travels through a subdivision that is in progress now. And there is the ability for the developer to front end that road if they wanted to build it sooner than expected. And then the segment north of Hazeldean Road is a more longer term. And then it's all different segments of road. The most northerly part up around Palladium is being built now through a different subdivision application. So what we see now on Robert Grant is not the ultimate configuration, but despite what it looks like now, it definitely is an arterial road. It's designated as a transit priority corridor, and the transit station that's shown on Schedule D of the official plan that Miguel mentioned, despite the fact that it's not built yet, it's still, the official plan policies do allow this request for additional height because it is designated as a future transit station. So whether or not it exists is not really pertinent to this discussion.
Okay, great. I see a lot of hands up, so I'll let my other colleagues jump in today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tierney. Councillor Hubley.
Thank you, Chair. My first question to staff is to do with the point that was raised by one of the delegations to do with the hydro lines. Could they speak to that? Because those hydro lines run through not just Stittsville, but my community as well, and in through what was formerly known as Nepean. It's the main power source coming into the city. So I'd like to hear staff comment on just how safe that is.
Maybe Aaron? Where's Kathy?
I can take that. Hydro One,
Sure,
Hydro One was circulated at the time of the rezoning application, and there were no comments of concern that were provided to us. They would also be involved at the time of the site plan application, which is when we would be looking at the exact location of the buildings. But there have been no concerns raised, and there are developments all along the perimeter of this hydro easement. One resident also mentioned potential concerns with parking in the hydro easement. There was an environmental assessment done for what's called the West Transitway connections. That was the future extension of light rail and transit to Stittsville. And Hydro One was also a stakeholder and very involved in that process. So they are certainly aware of the city's intent to construct a park and ride within the hydro lands. And no detailed design has been done yet, but they would be involved at the time of detailed design.
Okay, Kathy, I wasn't really concerned about the parking side of it. I think what the resident was raising is health concerns. And I don't think I'm looking for Hydro One to come back on health concern issues here. What I'm looking for is some details about studies that are available that staff would have available to them from Health Canada and others on the safety of building within these the cone of these power lines. For example, in my area, there was a school built underneath one of these power lines. So, you know, if you're looking for a lot of steel and everything, well, that goes into a school. And there was extensive studies done before that school was built. I know Health Canada does follow-up stories to make sure that there's no clusters of cancer or anything like that under these power lines. So when you look at these plans for approval, I'm assuming that you are taking these studies into account. Is that correct?
We are not involved in any studies like that through a rezoning process. There were years of work that was done through the Fernbank CDP when the entire framework for the community was developed. That was council approved back in 2009. And Hydro One was a stakeholder at that time. And it was during that process that it was identified where the various land uses would be. So this parcel was identified. It's meant for high density development. It's arterial Main Street. It's immediately abutting the hydro corridor, but all of that is what was intended. All we're dealing with now is a request to allow a taller building, but the yes or no about whether development is appropriate, that work was all done more than 10 years ago.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To staff, I just had a question piggybacking previous inquiry on traffic flow on the arterial road, because the road right now, if I want to get to the Queensway, which is probably the main way that Stittsville residents get downtown, can you just describe the timelines to upgrade the road network from this community where the proposal is to the Queensway?
Okay, just one moment, sorry. Okay, so right now, if someone, oops, sorry, you dropped my headphones. Okay, so right now, if someone were, if this building were constructed, or for residents that are living in the area, right now they would go northbound on Robert Grant as far as Abbott. And Abbott is built going eastward to Terry Fox. So then they would take Terry Fox up to the Queensway. That would be the route at this time. Robert Grant, as we discussed, will be extended. So the Abbott to Hazeldean segment, which is the one closest to this development, the funding for that is in 2024. So that would be funding in that year, and then add approximately 2 years for detailed design and construction. So that could be built in 2026. Now, there's also the possibility of the developer that the road runs through. They are in the process of a subdivision application. So if they front end it, that could conceivably come online sooner than that target. And then north of Hazeldean, the next segment would be Hazeldean to Palladium Drive. And that segment has funding in 2029, which means the road could be built in 2031. And then the most northern chunk, closest to the Queensway, it's from Palladium to a realigned Palladium with a roundabout. That has funding in 2022. And that has been front-ended by a subdivider in that area. So that is already being worked on. So the longest, I guess the segment that is the longest away is the part between Abbott, or sorry, between Hazeldean and Palladium. That would be the chunk that is the farthest away. And Councillor Gower made a motion to delay the tall building until the segment from Robert Grant to Maple Grove is constructed, and that would fall within that piece of Hazeldean to Palladium. And so for that, we're looking at approximately 2029. So by extending our staff report recommended a holding provision until Robert Grant was built up to Hazeldean. And that is technically not required. The traffic network can handle the traffic generated by this development. The number of units isn't changing from what the current zoning allows. So this is traffic that was expected. There was a traffic impact study done for this rezoning, and the numbers are really not much different than what's allowed. And back when the subdivision was done, the subdivision that created these blocks and created the lots on Livery and the surrounding area, there was a traffic impact study done there too, and it projected the number of cars that would be generated by the subdivision. And so really what's happening is what we expected. So we recommended that holding provision until Robert Grant is built up to Abbott Street, primarily to address public concerns that were expressed about an incomplete road network. But technically it is not required. So it was something that will defer construction till the road network gets more complete, but it's not really required.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you for that. My knowledge of rapid transit in this part of the town is not sharp. Can you speak to where the closest transit way stop is, please?
Right now, the closest bus stops are on Cope, which is a bit south of this development. And the primary transit is to serve express routes. So there's an express route that travels from this neighborhood and goes to Cunning's Pasture so people can catch the LRT. There's also local routes that serve this community, again on Cope, which would be a couple of blocks, that Robert Grant and Cope, which is a few blocks south. And there is local transit service that would go to Terry Fox Station, and that runs all day. And that would be for if someone wanted to go to Centrum, for example, teenagers want to go to a movie, they can get on the bus and go to Terry Fox. And then there's also a bus that goes, 61 goes through Stittsville. So if somebody wanted to go into Stittsville, it runs from Terry Fox to Stittsville. But certainly at the moment, it's mostly geared to commuter traffic, but as the population grows and there's more demand, adding more residents will provide the impetus to provide better service.
Okay, thank you for your detailed answers. Thank you very much.
Councillor, if I can just jump in for a second, I just wanted to point out through the site plan control process as well, OC Transpo will be circulated. So there is an opportunity to explore with them through the site plan control for each of the individual buildings, whether additional stops are warranted from OC Transpo's perspective along Robert Grant.
Okay, excellent. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you for that added information, Aaron, and thank you, Kathy. Next questions from Councillor Kitts. Catherine?
Thank you, Chair. We're talking about the west end of the city today, but we see a lot of the same issues and concerns about development versus infrastructure in the east end. So I really appreciate the discussion we're having, and I do have some questions for staff. Can you comment on, I'm not sure who to direct this to, but can staff comment on how an appropriate height gets decided? Like how did you determine what height could be allowed in this location?
If I can jump in here, Councillor, I just wanted to express our evaluation of height is typically, we respond to the development application before us in determining whether it's appropriate development or not. So it's not necessarily a matter for us to decide, what exactly is the permissions. We look at what's before us and determine whether it's appropriate. We did have some discussions certainly with the developer about transitions and recognizing that the existing permissions permit a higher development form adjacent to Livery. So from the get-go, there was discussions about ensuring that appropriate transition to the adjacent communities. We have a set of urban design guidelines for high-rise buildings that we use to evaluate proposals for high-rise. So we take into consideration things like proximity to the low-rise community. So how far away a high-rise is. In this case, the tallest building proposed on the site is 98 meters from the property line along Livery. So it's a substantial distance from that low-rise community. And then we also look at things, a guiding principle is on a slide that Miguel provided showing a 45-degree angular plane. So how that development, that height is proposed within proximity again to that low-rise community. And then we evaluate things like whether an urban form, a pedestrian scale urban form is proposed along Robert Grant. So in this case as well, through discussions with the developer, we've introduced a podium form along Robert Grant. So there's step backs at a minimum of above the 4th floor. When Lapine comes in for their site plan, they may opt to do a lower podium, but at a minimum above or at a maximum, I should say, above the 4th floor, there would be required step backs so that pedestrian urban experience along Robert Grant is maintained for the podium form. So it's a combination of factors, but primarily, I should add as well, we also take into consideration the advice of our urban design review panel. So this application was before the urban design review panel, and the notes associated with that design panel review are included as part of Kathy's report at the end. And that formed part of our discussion with the developer in terms of consideration of this additional height and how to best shape the site.
Okay, great. That's very helpful. And is there a limit to height in the official plan?
I'll say generally speaking, there's not a maximum limit of consideration, but for high-rise buildings, once we're into the 30-story plus category, that's an area where there's specific direction in the official plan as to where those high rises are considered, and those are and so that's a different category of analysis that we take into consideration at that.
Okay.
At that
and we're
rate.
under that here. Okay. And then my last question is, kind of more general, but how do we pay for the infrastructure upgrades needed in our suburbs? Is bringing infrastructure upgrades to a community before we add intensification, is that possible?
Madam Chair, maybe if I could just start with that conversation and let Ms. Ragus or O'Connell to add into that. In suburban communities, growth is intended to pay for growth. So a lot of the infrastructure that comes with new developments, Councillor, it's part of our development charge bylaw. It's part of the development that comes before you. So there's been a number of different studies that our policy team has done with respect to affordability with our suburban development. And this would be another situation in case where part of our development charges and our taxes that we acquire ultimately pay for our infrastructure. The challenge is sometimes it's a chicken and the egg situation, which comes first. And often we need those development charges to be able to pay and support for the infrastructure.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. That's it for me.
You're on mute, Chair.
I'm trying to save my bandwidth here so I can still continue to hear people. Anyway, I was just going to say that as an example to what you were just saying, we see that across the city. You have situations certainly in your neck of the woods, and as Ms. Snedden said, but the Strandherd project that's currently underway for, I think it's 105 million or something, that keeps getting bandied about by on a regular basis at many committees, as a solution to a lot of things. But well over 90% of that is paid for by development charges, including all the amount that goes for the servicing for the sewers and the water and all of that sort of thing. That's all part of that project. And those things in the suburbs, especially the water and the sewer, are really like 98%, 99% paid for through development charges. So if you don't have the development, you're not getting the work done too. And so our last person with, counselor with questions is Vice Chair Gower.
Actually, Chair, my colleagues have covered the questions I wanted to ask, so thank you. I was hoping to use this 5 minutes just to do a wrap up and explain my motion if I can.
Yep, no one else has any questions? Oh, there you go. Thank you. Go ahead. Go ahead, Glenn.
I've got slides too. So first of all, I want to say thank you to all the residents who made presentations today and the many residents who wrote letters to the committee. I will talk about the motion, but first I wanted to set it up by talking to the committee about growth in Stittsville. Currently, we have a population of 43,000 people in 15,000 households. And over the past few years, we've grown at a rate 30% faster than the city at large. By 2034, we expect to have 67,000 people living in Stittsville. Between 2014 and 2019, the city collected $129 million in development charges from new builds in Stittsville. And in 2019 alone, it was $42 million. That's a full $10 million more than the next highest ward, which is Carol Ann Meehan's ward in Gloucester South Nepean. So we have certainly been paying our fair share towards development charges. Right now, we have 25 active development applications in Stittsville. To put that in perspective, that means there are more homes and apartments in the approval stage right now than there were total homes in Stittsville just 15 years ago. The pace of this growth can be overwhelming for residents, and it's also very frustrating when these new homes arrive ahead of the transportation infrastructure. Now, many of these new applications are for homes along the future Robert Grant Avenue corridor. In fact, most of them are. Robert Grant Avenue will be the major north-south transportation arterial from Fernbank to the Queensway. So far, only a little stub of the road is built. So this green part down here at the bottom is what's built. The rest is what is still to be built. And the Lepine site's the little orange square right there. So how does traffic get to the Queensway now? There's a few ways, but most people in this neighborhood head up Iber Road, an industrial road with 2 lanes, no sidewalks, and then through Huntmar, which is through another neighborhood, a collector street, never designed to handle the amount of traffic it's taking. And transit for the Fernbank area, it takes 2 transfers just to get to Tunney. So the transit area, the transit service in this area is also pretty poor. So the site that Lepine owns, they're allowed to build 9 stories as of right, including across the street from a row of 2-story townhomes. That's all in the 2009 Fernbank Community Design Plan. And as you've heard, they're also allowed to go higher because under Schedule D of the official plan, it's within 400 meters from a future transit station. So they're totally justified in asking for this height based on the policy. But the problem is, despite the thousands of homes already being built and built already, despite the tens of millions of dollars collected in development charges, Robert Grant is nowhere near to being finished, and that promised transit station is at least 2031 or beyond. So, no wonder residents are frustrated with this process. I can totally understand that. How can we tell residents this applicant is allowed more height based on proximity to transit when the transit's still years away and the arterial road isn't even built yet? So it's this problem we have with the planning where it's a huge gap between when homes are built and when the roads and transit are there to serve residents. So the motion I introduced helps close this gap for this Lepine project in particular. They have come to the table with a lot of improvements already based on concerns from the community. The motion I've introduced goes a big step further. It would delay the construction of the 18-story tower until Robert Grant is open all the way to Maple Grove. This is important because it's the last phase of the road to be built. So we're saying you can't build the 18-story tower until Robert Grant is complete to the connection to the Queensway. It also gets us a lot closer to when the transit station will actually be built. And that was the whole reason to allow extra height in the first place. And it'll get us closer to when shops and services are in the area to support these residents within walking distance. And I do know that this proposal is unpopular. It still will be even with this amendment. But in the bigger picture, putting apartments and putting more density close to transit station is the kind of trade-off we're going to need if we're going to stop pushing further and further out into farm fields and forests and taking action on climate change. What we have to do as a council and city staff now is step up and make sure we speed up the timeline to connect transit, to build the roads and transportation infrastructure that we so badly need here in Stittsville. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and thank you again to all of the people that participated with their correspondence and in coming out today. I see no other hands being waved, so thank you for that. On the zoning bylaw amendment, 5,000 Robert Grant Avenue, formerly 1,000 Robert Grant Avenue, we do have that technical amendment to the holding provision. Vice Chair Gower introduced it already.
I have, yes.
Okay, so on the technical amendment,
Carried.
is that carried?
Carried.
Okay, and on the zoning bylaw amendment for 5,000 Robert Grant Avenue, formerly 1,000 Robert Grant Avenue as amended, is that carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Thanks very much, everyone. And thank you, Vice Chair Gower. I know over the past year you have really done a lot of work on this. And I'd like to thank Miguel Tremblay too, and Ms. Lapine, who, it's always good when you have developers who are willing to listen to the community, listen to our staff. And I know that Kathy Ragas, with the support of Aaron, did a really good job. But really, when you listen and you can make the changes that you have, it's, for some of us, it could be the envy of what we're trying to do as well. So thank you for that. Thanks, everyone. I wanted to let you know that since the consent agenda, when we had the item number 6, which we just kind of set it aside, I'm going to have that come before us now. That's the one that Councillor Meehan was wanting to speak to and want a clarification on the late breaking solution, if you will, for the payback. And so that, just to remind you, that's the front ending report preliminary design of the Leitrim Road Bank Street intersection improvements and the Bank Street widening south of Leitrim Road to John Skipper Drive. And we had, is Councillor Meehan back with us?
Let me just check.
And Pierre, pardon?
I don't see her.
Okay, Councillor, not Councillor, Pierre Dufresne. Is he here? I see him there. Yeah, okay, so I did get confirmation, which is why we have this one before us now and not after, that the conversation was held between the two of them, and that Councillor Meehan is aware and supportive, and you are as well, Mr. Dufresne. Yeah, and Ms. Nedden, any comments?
No, Madam Chair, I think Mr. Dufresne and the councillor were able to communicate and connect on that, and I think everything's good to go from our end. Thank you.
Yeah, we cleared, Councillor Meehan had some questions. We cleared up the misunderstanding and she's satisfied.
Okay, so on this item, we have the motion that Vice Chair Gower moved to do the payback now because there is money available to do so. Oh, excuse me. I see a hand up, Councillor Moffat.
Thanks. Just for the sake of clarity, and because we had talked about this, but then no real closure. So just to confirm, this is a report that we would have paid them back with accrued DCs over time, but we're paying them back now using some, I assume, surplus funds out of the network modifications program that we don't need for anything else.
Madam Chair, the time frame for payback was 2023, and the money for the project was approved by council in 2021. So the money and funding is there. It was just a series of timing of when the payback would occur. I'm going to let Ms. Hugh or Frank McKinney to be able to confirm if there's anything different from that.
Lily?
I can help you out perhaps a little bit. The funds to pay us back are part of the assigned project funding, as opposed to any surplus funding. It's being paid back for the intent that it was approved for by council in the last budget.
Okay, thanks. That was all. I just wanted to make sure the network modifications program is not a huge fund.
No.
And it's way overprescribed. So I wanted to make sure we aren't pulling from anything else. So I appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Scott, for raising that. Okay, so on this item, on the amendment, so on the amendment that was moved by Vice Chair Gower, is that carried? Carried. And on the front ending report, which I've introduced many times now, as amended, is that carried?
Carried.
Carried. Thank you, Pierre. And the next item that you came out for, we've deferred it to the next meeting. Sorry, we have it. Sorry. Hang on. I've reordered all my stuff, so.
That was already approved.
Yeah.
Item number 7. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks very much. So the next item up is not 6429 Renault Road because we've deferred that item. So let me just see where we are now. Okay, we're going to number 9, which is a site plan control for 4 Range Road. Is that right, Ms. Stephanie?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, so we have speakers in support and against, and we have, and this is in Councillor Fleury's ward. So we do have a motion. Do we have anybody moving that motion yet?
I've agreed to put it on the table, but I'll let Councillor Fleury speak to it.
Okay, do you want to introduce it right now, Councillor Fleury?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councillor Leeper. So there are, as you can see in my comments, there are 3 sections. I'm focused on one with this motion here, which is the privacy between 4 and 6 range, and basically asking that the applicant put in a privacy fence. And I'm flexible to the wording. It doesn't need to be wooden. It could be treed, but certainly just putting that on the table that we are looking for a privacy fence between 4 and 6 range.
Okay, thank you for introducing that. All right, I'll call the speakers forward now. Our first speaker is Mr. Barry Podolsky, and who has sent in written comments just early, I think it was maybe Monday. Barry, are you here?
Yes, I am here. Can you hear me?
There you are. I can see you. Yeah. Welcome. It's nice to see you again.
Nice to be here. And I keep my presentations to Planning Committee very, very sparingly, such as the Shadow Laurier. And this happens to be something in my backyard. And I live at 8 Range Road, and I just in the Heritage Conservation District. And I just wanted to say that the proposal for the intensification of this property conversion from a diplomatic mission to a residential, I support. It's not a question of, I want it in my backyard. What I'm concerned about in discussions with Councillor Fleury is that in the Heritage Conservation District, attached to this building designed by one of Canada's premier architects, Colburn Meredith, who was on the Ottawa Improvement Commission, the proposed wooden fire escape is really a terrible eyesore in the Heritage Conservation District. And I would hope that Planning Committee could modify the staff recommendation to approve to have the owner and their architects redesign the fire escape to be in metal and to move it to the back of the property. It disfigures quite a beautiful stone and brick facade. And I also just want to say I support the motion or the amendment that has been put forward to do a privacy fence. Not that it affects me personally, but I think that the people next door at 6 Range Road would benefit from that. So there's my very brief presentation, and it's actually nice to see all of your smiling faces.
It's nice to see you too, Barry. Been a long time since the Champlain room, as I said before we get started today.
True.
Anyone have, let me see. No, I don't see any questions, but thank you very much for your submission and for coming out today.
Well, nice to see you all.
Thank you. The next speaker we have is Action Sandy Hill.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, Susan, thank you. Thank you for joining us today. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. So Susan Young, I'm the president of Action Sandy Hill. Like Barry, I will be very brief. I just wanted to say that certainly Action Sandy Hill supports this application, feels it will meet a housing need in the neighborhood, and it's a sympathetic conversion, especially for a heritage conservation district, of which we have a number. This cannot be said for the majority of the other applications we see in our neighborhood, so we're happy to support it. We do also support, though, the asks from Barry and the councillor on the stairs, please, for the heritage look, and the privacy fence. And I understand as well there'll be something raised about a curb cut. Certainly support all of those. And these are easy fixes, we feel, for the applicant. And that's it. Thank you very much.
You're on mute, Chair.
I'm just trying to look at the participants. I have no questions for you. Thanks very much. Next up, we have Chris Donegan follow, and this is the applicant. So I don't know whether, Chris, you're speaking. Mitchick? I'm not sure what the pronunciation is, and Manfred Schlesinger, which I'm not sure. I'm probably murdering that one too. So Christopher, let's start with you.
Sure, thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm one of 2 owners of the building. Just wanted to share some comments because we had received some feedback regarding the staircase. Unfortunately, due to the orientation of the building and the proposed density inside the building, the units run east-west, so therefore access to and to clarify before I move into that point, it's not a fire escape. It's actually an exit stair for safety. And I think what some people are referring to in terms of fire escapes is old metal fire escapes around Sandy Hill. This is not that, so I don't want that confusion. Secondly, like I said, the building runs east-west, so the apartments are kind of stacked east-west on either side of the building. So moving the staircase to the back of the building is impossible to offer access to all the apartments that would be needing that access. So that basically is impossible. And then the other thing I wanted to note is that I submitted a letter. We did review some of the feedback about the staircase in detail, and we submitted a letter last night from the architect just stating a few reasons why it's not feasible to go to metal for that structure. And some of it is structural, and then the other part of it is just that, you know, we've run through all this in Heritage 6 months ago and through staff, and everyone was satisfied and it meets the heritage planning requirements. So I just wanted to state that on the record, and here to answer any questions if anything else comes up.
Thank you. And are the other people with you or listed here, are they speaking as well, or are you speaking?
No, just me. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Chris. Let me just see. Councillor Leeper has a question.
Sorry, I may have missed it, but did you address the privacy fence that Councillor Fleury is seeking between the properties? Is there any reason why that couldn't be done?
Yeah, sorry, I missed that point. Yeah, we're open to that. I believe the neighbor is not. There's a tree line along that property line that there's shared trees. It was recommended by the Forestry Department of Ottawa not to remove those trees, and also through our tree conservation report that was submitted in our application, and that's why there's not a privacy fence there. We prefer not to remove that greenery, but I'm not opposed to it, but it would require cooperation from neighbors and cutting down several large mature trees in the neighborhood, which is against what most most feedback is that that's not wanted. So
I'm going to guess some of those trees are probably boundary trees, so shared ownership.
that's correct.
Yeah, which is always complicated as well. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, can get very complicated. Yeah.
I see Mr. James is shaking his head in agreement with what you were saying, Councillor Leeper. I don't see any other questions there for you, Christopher. So thank you for coming. Oh, do you have a question of Christopher? No. Okay, thank you, Christopher, for coming out today. So we'll go over now. Does anyone on the committee want to speak before Councillor Fleury? This is now questions of staff. Councillor Hubley.
Thank you, Chair. I'm hoping to get comment from either Councillor Leeper or Councillor Fleury on this new information that the neighbors may not want this fence and that it would involve removal of trees, which is something we always try to avoid at every opportunity.
Correct, Councillor Leeper. The intention is to certainly not remove trees, but to provide a privacy fence. We have been in contact with a number of tenants in the building in the adjacent building, and obviously their main entrance is on the north wall, and the number of new doors to the southern facade of this building is 5 doors, I believe. So the intent here, and I'm glad to amend my motion, but we are looking for a green privacy fence that would retain the trees, but does create a privacy buffer between the two properties. And I believe I have spoken to the applicant's other partner who was in favor of that. So I hope that can be implemented.
So, Madam Chair, will we see an amended motion before the vote is called so we know exactly what we're getting into here?
Well, we do have the Fleury motion that Councillor Leeper has put on the table at the beginning of the conversation.
But it references a wooden fence and suggests to me that everybody's in favor of this. And now we've heard from one of the owners that may not be the case. And Councillor Fleury is suggesting he's not committed to the wooden fence, that he's open to other ideas. And so I'm just wondering if that's going to get in the motion, because I'd hate to vote for this motion that says a wooden fence and then the owners be obligated to build that fence if maybe all the neighbors aren't in agreement.
Madam Chair, could I suggest a path forward so that we don't get caught here in the motion?
I think that's what Councillor Hubley's asking for.
Yes.
Would staff look at working with the applicant to enable a green planting that adds privacy but doesn't impact the existing trees on that southern line?
So would that be more of a direction then, Councillor Fleury?
I'm fine if planning staff are willing to implement it.
Is that possible, Mr. Reno?
I don't see a problem with that if the applicant's also willing to move in that direction.
Okay, going back over. Christopher, are you still here?
I'll bring him back in.
Okay, thanks. Christopher, did you hear the comments that were just made?
Yeah, sorry, it kicks me out when you give me back privileges.
Okay,
yeah.
let me know.
Yeah, I think
so. So what's happened is, rather than a motion, we have a direction that you and your co-owner work with the planner, JC Reno, to see whether that you can add green to provide a privacy without disturbing any of the trees, with the compliance of the people, the neighbors.
Yeah, I think that might work a little better in that space. Also want to point out that although some exit stairs are being added on that side of the building, the primary entrances are actually on the other side of the building. But I agree, maybe some privacy in terms of greenery could be done, and that's a lot easier to do than and less disturbance for the trees, for sure.
Good. Back over to you. I think now. Oh, wait, hang on, Councillor Fleury, Councillor Cloutier. has a question.
Just
From
a
staff
quick
or
a quick comment on what we're doing right now. Is all these directions not captured in the second part of the recommendations that Planning Committee return delegated authority to staff for further changes to the approved plans, conditions, and reports? It's pretty general, but I think, and there's a willingness here on the applicant, the planner, and Councillor Fleury to find a solution. I believe it's captured in there, Madam Chair. I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. Back over to you, Councillor Fleury.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your help here. And I think we did take an important step. I am no heritage expert, and I want to thank heritage staff for their involvement through that. There will continue to be discussions on elements of character and materials. So I will allow that conversation to continue to open and not rest on this application. I did make that as a comment, and I think it is up for interpretation, and obviously I've made my position on that clear. The issue I wanted to raise to committee is and have a question to staff is relating to curb cuts. So, you know, being knee deep into reading the OP documents and the various documents over the years, we have goals to reduce the amount of curb cuts. We're seeing a lot of developments through that, and I want to thank planning staff for heading that direction. We're seeing usually much more friendly landscaping and much more standard and accessible sidewalks because of it. I've come across an operation issue, and I would love to understand how planning staff work through. We are told by solid waste staff that if no curb cuts exist on a property, then there is no, say, public waste pickup. So there appears to be a bit of a gap, and obviously we're in Zoom world, so maybe it's lost into the emails, but my interpretation is unclear as to how do we ensure that the planning policy goals of removing curb cuts can actually live in practice, as the operations team have seen to highlight a barrier here.
Madam Chair, I can fill this one. I think it's important to make a difference in this case between this property, which is a modification to an existing situation, as opposed to a brand new development and a brand new curb cut. So what we're faced with here is an existing driveway with an existing curb cut. And I'd also like to point out that the applicant had accepted to reinstate a portion of the front yard, which was previously used as front yard parking. So we are seeing an improvement, a definitive improvement in the front yard situation on this property. What remains, or what was proposed to remain, is an existing driveway, an existing curb cut that is permitted to exist on a property such as this one. What the councillor is referring to in terms of waste collection is one of their requirements that exists, that they need a curb cut in order to roll their waste bins out onto the street. This is not new. Necessarily, a curb cut for waste purposes does not need to be as wide as a driveway, but so it could be as wide as a pathway, because that is what's required for waste management. But in this case, we did not think it was worthwhile to ask the applicant to reinstate an entire driveway's width of a curb cut in this situation, because it was an existing one. And one last thing I want to add is reinstating the curb cut in this situation. In some cases, you might see an improvement in on-street parking, but in this case, there is a hydrant at this location, so staff don't see any definite improvements in adding the onerous task of reinstating a curb at this location.
And Madam Chair, if I may add too, there is a driveway there today, and the driveway is intended to stay. And having that driveway will allow vehicles for deliveries to come in, people to move in, people to move out of the apartment building. And as Mr. Renaud had said, there is a fire hydrant there, and visiting the site, my site check, there's also no parking on that side. So having this curb cut in that driveway makes it a better situation for people moving in and moving out and for deliveries, because there's, as I said, there's no parking on the street.
And Doug, while I have your attention there, can you just clarify whether or not the suggestion that Councillor Cloutier made that item number two captures the essence of the consideration and work with for the added privacy along the trees existing without needing a formal direction? Would that be included in that? Would it
Madam
be,
Chair,
or is it?
my opinion, and listening to the councillor, Madam Chair, is yes. If delegated authority goes back to staff, we can look at putting some more greenery along there, other trees. There are 3 very mature white pines there now, along with cedar trees. So there's a good opportunity to plant more vegetation along there if delegated authority is given back. So I would have to, Tim Mark might want to say something, but I would have to say yes, I would agree with the council.
Mr. Mark?
I have nothing to add, Madam Chair.
Good, thank you. Councillor Fleury?
Yeah, no, and thank you for that, Madam Chair. I want to thank both JC and Doug on the actual application. I'm still raising the flag on the policy though. So if we have infills and they remove curb cuts, or if we have new buildings where there's no driveways, there seems to be an anomaly where solid waste is saying, well, wait a minute, we can't serve this, but private contractors will pick up even if it's raised curbs. So is that maybe something, we don't need to resolve this today, but is that something that we can take away in the effort of the OP? Because I do see issues where we want to see less curb cuts, and its achievability is
Inquiry, and then a response could be provided to the councillor as a wrap up. That would be great. Thanks, councillor.
That would be good. So Councillor Fleury, we're almost at the end of what we, can you?
Absolutely. I'll write an inquiry and send it to Melody for committee or for staff to look at. Thank you.
We'll put it on the next meeting, which is the 27th of May. Okay, perfect. Okay. I don't see any other hands waving or any other kind of getting my attention. Having said that, we have the site plan control before us for 4 Range Road, and we don't have the need to have the motion any longer. So on this item, is it carried?
Carried.
Yes.
Carried.
Thanks very much. I think that is it, correct, Ms. Stephanie? It is. So folks, we have our next meeting is May the 27th, and I would imagine it has the potential of going a bit longer than this one, or a lot longer, or the same. But if I can give you a heads up in advance, I will try to do that. Okay, thank you for your attention, everyone. Thank you for all of those who aren't on the committee that came out today as well. And to all the staff, thanks, Ms. Nedden and your team. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Have a great day.